How's it going, everybody? This is Dailies to Downloads. My name is Chad. With me is Eric. We are back with you for another episode. And this episode, we are going to discuss repeated viewings of movies. So, what do we mean by repeated viewings? Well, we could mean a lot of different things, really. You could just want to watch a movie again because you like it and you think that it's a good movie. You might want to watch it again because of nostalgia reasons. Maybe you want to watch it because it's familiar and it's nice to remember the past, or maybe you want to watch it for therapeutic reasons, or maybe you want to watch it for existential reasons. Perhaps the movie kind of, when you watch it, even despite what you might feel about it as terms of rating, maybe it brings you back to a certain place in your life and makes you think about where you were then, where you are now. A lot of things could do that, songs, what have you. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And, some movies might need repeated viewings because you might not have fully understood everything that the director put out there. Other movies might require repeated viewings or might warrant repeated viewings just because even if you understood everything, as you watch a movie more than once, other layers start to become unraveled and you look at the movie in different ways. So we will start off here. I will just ask Eric. Eric, are you the type of person that watches movies more than once, or are you more of a type of person who one and done? I've seen the movie once, I liked it or I didn't, and I'm moving on.
Um, yeah, I guess like in the most general sense, probably would be one and done. But like I don't have like any kind of like steadfast rule about that. You know what
Right.
I mean? But just as a basic, I'll never get to everything in my short lifespan, so I got to keep moving forward. I got to keep watching something new for the first time. Can't go back, And obviously, there, as we'll talk about, many different reasons why that's not the case. But typically, I will say that I've rarely have gone back to too many things um, in my own individual pursuits. It's typically something I haven't seen for the first time.
Right. And yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit of both. I definitely watch. There are certain movies that I watch more than once, and there are certain movies that I watch for many of the reasons that I listed. Um, but it's are there any movies that you watch for therapeutic reasons? Any movies that, like, and by therapeutic reasons, the emotional payoff of the movie. You know what to expect. There are no surprises. You're just watching it because you know it will make you feel good or feel better. Are there any movies that you watch for those reasons, or no?
Yeah, there are certain ones that I think do have like a very what would be the word? Watchability. I'll make up word. Kind of revisiting thing. We're
I've
like,
used that word before too, so don't feel
yeah,
bad.
we're let's say like a Scorsese movie, or like there are certain directors or like
Sure.
Hitchcock things where it feels like you watch it the first time to get the plot stuff, but it's not really about that as much. And like, so you can kind of the next time or whatever, it can kind of um, wash over you, yeah, in different ways too. And I think when I think about Scorsese movies and things like that, it would be the kind of things that I guess people don't really do anymore. But if you were channel surfing and one of the films happened to be on,
Right.
you could stop and kind of just go into it from wherever it is in the duration of the movie.
Right. Well, I
Um,
mean, on that note, now, some of the younger people might not understand what that exactly means, but before streaming services, before digital copies, before it was easy to own a DVD of every title you wanted, you had to rely on exactly what Eric said, which was channel surfing. And, stations like TBS would often have old movies. AMC would often have, that's what they specialize in. And so you would be traveling, looking at the channels, and, oh, this movie's on. So you stop and you watch it. And that's why to this day, there will be movies that I tell people, yeah, I've seen that movie in parts, or, I've seen most of this movie, but I haven't seen it from start to finish for that very reason, because I might have just watched it via TV whenever it was on. There are plenty of movies like that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sorry, as my lamp my light has died. It comes and goes. So if I appear darker, it's because of
You're just doing a strobe effect. That's okay.
that electric bill is not going to pay itself. Somehow the laptop continues on, but the lights in the house don't. But yeah, I guess that is like the comforting thing, and the advent of YouTube and things like that, where you could just search for if you name whatever movie, whatever scene, I could probably find it in a minute, right?
Right.
I'm sure so many people have seen things like I don't know, you talking to me from Taxi Driver that have
Yeah.
not seen the film Taxi Driver.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so like I feel like that's more of a thing now. And I think one of the big parts of rewatching movies too is that like the duration and accessibility makes it easy to do that, right? Like
Right.
whenever I don't know many, but like when I talk to somebody who's going to be rereading a book, that to me is like whoa, like that's a lot,
So my
Where,
wife does that a lot. My
yeah,
wife has, my wife's a huge Harry Potter fan, so she's reread those books many times. And that's an investment
yeah,
for me.
exactly.
Like for me, that's a big investment. But she's much more into reading than she is watching movies. Watching movies is one of my passions. So that's what I tend to rewatch more often than not. I've rewatched shows before too, but even shows are an investment. And most of the times when I've rewatched shows from start to finish, it's to show it to her, usually. Like
Yeah,
Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or whatever the show might be. It'll be like, oh, you haven't watched this? Okay, well, I'll show it to you. If it's a good enough show, I'll gladly rewatch it. Just so somebody else can experience it for the first time. But movies, it's a lot easier to rewatch a movie,
yeah,
and
absolutely, yeah. And like nobody would ever question you, like, oh, you listened to that song more than once, like,
right,
duh, like like that wouldn't seem weird at all, due to the duration and the accessibility, I imagine.
right, yeah.
Meanwhile, if you say I saw Hamilton twice, oh, you are upper class. You are 1%, or you were before it premiered on Disney.
Oh yeah,
That kind
absolutely.
of stuff.
Yeah, and then mentioning my wife again, um, I look over my shoulder like I'm afraid she's there watching.
She's watching you, giving you.
She saw Rent many times,
Yeah,
many times, and yeah, I mean that's not only an investment of time but also money in the case of shows on Broadway.
yeah.
But if it's good enough and it makes you feel good, I say go for it. So let's get into some movies that have actually benefited from the fact that people watch them repeatedly. Um, and the one that comes to mind immediately, which is also probably my favorite movie of all time, is The Shawshank Redemption, because that movie did not light the box office on fire when it came out. It grew an audience by word of mouth, by airing on TV, which is how I saw it. That's my friend told me, hey, it's going to be on TV, let's watch it, and that's how I watched it. And to me, that is the definition of a movie that like it's a movie that's good. It's not like you have to understand, like there's nothing confusing going on, but it is the type of movie that is good right away and stays good, but it almost gets better with age, like a fine wine, if that makes any sense. Are there any movies that you can think of like that you like? Because like when I was thinking of this topic, the Shawshank Redemption came to mind right away, and The Big Lebowski came to mind right away. And that was one where the first time I watched it, I thought it was funny, but I was like, okay, yeah, it was funny. I didn't think I was ever watch it again, but I did watch it again and again and again and again, and I've seen it many times. And there's new things in it almost every time I watch it that become humorous, and that's hard to do when you're making a movie. To make a movie that is good and stays good and doesn't get worse or doesn't necessarily date itself is a difficult feat to accomplish in my opinion. So if a filmmaker can do that, that's pretty great. But are there any that come to mind for you like that?
Yeah, and I think that like as we're talking about it as being a part of the movie itself, but also it is such a personal kind of question, right?
Right.
That like because we change as well. So like
Absolutely.
so the things like just thinking when you said Shawshank, I just hear the S and the H, so that made me think of something I've watched a lot, like The Shining,
Right.
where I've probably seen that 7, 8 times. But like I've also um, read so many things about it over the years that I kind of wanted to go back and
Sure.
I'm you're looking for different things, and also when you watch something for a second time, the experience is obviously very different. And that like I don't like getting too caught up in the plot of some things, but like the human mind just needs that for connection and like connecting these events.
Right.
So when you go back to it, you can be a little uh, removed from that and like think about individual scenes for like a lot longer. And
Oh,
like
absolutely.
if I zone out for the next 10 minutes, that's okay because I'm still in the headspace of this previous scene and I already know those beats of the plot, so that's not an issue. So yada yada yada,
And on a side note, what you were just saying there, just to add to that, we're there's a podcast called Talking Sopranos where they basically review an episode each podcast. And so, my wife and I have been rewatching The Sopranos, and I've seen it many times. And so this time when I watch it, I'm paying attention really to a specific character's acting, and I might not have analyzed that character as closely the first go round. But this time, for instance, it's Edie Falco, like, and she's great in her role, but I'm looking more at what she's doing in each scene than I did before. So it's like you were saying, you might not be as focused on the plot the second, third, or subsequent times around. You might be focusing on different things that you read or
yeah,
just something that springs out at you that didn't spring out at you before. But
yeah.
anyway, go ahead.
And I was also thinking of then, which is part of I think what you're asking too is that there's some films. Have you ever seen films where you were a little cold on it, or like you were not to say you're not like in love with it, but you also kind of feel like you're not necessarily finished with it. Like I've had things where I've seen it and for various reasons I feel like I need to see this again or I need to kind of experience it again because I don't know if it's something like you're tired or if you're in a bad or any situational environment thing that might be happening, like you kind of feel like you it even it's not even like I like it or I don't like it, but I feel like I'm
Mhm.
not done necessarily with it and I feel like I need a better grasp of it, especially if you're going to be writing about it or if you're going to be
Sure.
discussing it. Like just one go around kind of feels like not enough. Like I don't feel like I got a grasp on it regardless of whether I like it or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you're exactly talking about, like, are you talking more about like movies that you might not fully grasp that you have to watch again? Because, that certainly applies to this topic.
Yeah,
If you're
I guess like things like
certainly several titles by David Lynch
David
could
Lynch.
fall into this
Yeah,
category.
like I think the first time I saw a lot of when I was not really familiar with David Lynch, I see Blue Velvet for the first time or Mulholland Drive. Like, um, I didn't dislike it. Like I felt something, but I didn't
Right.
know what. But I thought about it for a long. I think that's the other thing. It's like yeah, you watch it for 2 hours, but I'm thinking about it for a long time after that. So like
Right.
you are like when you mentioned watching movies for therapeutic reasons or nostalgic reasons, like kind of what you're saying is that like you retain the memory eases you or
Right.
soothes you, right? And that's kind of what you're holding on to. So I've been intrigued by a lot of things like David Lynch movies that made me want to go back. Which is not necessarily a question of quality or anything or 2001 things like that.
I was going to say, I was going to mention that one. That's a big one to
All
me.
Kubrick movies I feel like are
Oh yeah, a lot of them, and you were talking, you expressed it well when you were talking about, but you might not have grasped everything, but you felt something. And, my wife and I have had disagreements about this before with certain movies. And, if she doesn't understand it fully 100%, then she tends to not like it. And I don't always view it that way. For instance, one that springs to mind immediately, and we we had so many disagreements about this, was Syriana, which is to
that's
me,
a throwback from
right, a very overlooked, underrated movie. And when I first saw it, I was, I knew I didn't understand certain aspects of it, but it still resonated with me,
Yeah.
and I still liked it in a lot of different ways, and that was certainly a movie that benefited from going back and watching again. Um, and in looking at lists of movies that you really need to go back and watch again to kind of soak everything in, Memento came up on my list, or not on my personal list, came up on lists I researched a lot. And if we're going into foreign films, you could, mention titles from Krzysztof Kieslowski. The Double Life of Veronique is one that I love a lot. Or Werkmeister Harmonies is a good one.
Yeah, any Godard kind of thing, like to just watch it once, it's like only scratching the surface. Like there's so many citations and texts and everything thrown at you every scene that there's no way one shot at one go around with it is enough. That doesn't mean that you're going to enjoy it the second go around, but it's so much stuff is being thrown at you that you need to watch it once,
right?
Note certain things in your head and come back to it if you're inclined.
Last Year at Marienbad is another one.
Yeah.
But yeah, and what is Tarkovsky? A lot of his movies, I would say.
Arts and yeah.
I
mean, yeah, that's even thinking like an American indie like Shane Carruth, like Primer, and
that was on a couple lists, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like, whether I like it or not, like I still don't know. I've seen it like over a decade ago now, but like you kind of think about it, and also I think there's probably a difference with, you said like when people may feel like they don't understand something, so it's bad. Like I don't know if the goal is always to quote unquote understand it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Where going back is more to like, I guess, like why you put on a record, something like you said, like you want to kind of feel that vibe again or kind of groove to that. And that would be, there are certain high moments that I feel like in a lot of movies that I like going back to.
And what you were saying about certain movies, you might not, like the goal might not be to understand everything. The same could be said about the tone of the movie. Not every movie is, and it took me a long time to really fully appreciate this, is that not every movie needs to be happy. Not every movie needs to end on a happy note. And that might seem really simple to understand, but we're preconditioned to expect a happy ending. And not every movie has that. And there are certain movies, and this will get into another aspect of this as a reviewer, not anymore, but anyway, when I would compile my top 10 lists for the year, I would always, and I don't know, you probably don't do this, but correct me if I'm wrong, I would take repeated viewings into account. Like if I watched a movie that it was directed well, it was acted well, but I told myself I'm only going to watch this once because of it might be depressing, or it might be a topic or a subject matter that I just really don't care to re-examine, I will put a movie that if it's like a 9 out of 10, I will take a movie that's an 8 out of 10 that I think, wow, I'm definitely going to rewatch this. It's more entertaining. It's more watchable, as you would say earlier. I would hold that one in higher regard, even if that 8 out of 10 movie has some issues with it overall. Because to me, it's important. It's important, if a movie is good enough that you want to revisit it, if it makes you feel good, or if it has, maybe it has an actor in it that you like, or maybe it's just by a director that you like. You were mentioning Scorsese. Goodfellas, to me, is certainly, of his canon, I would say his, like, Goodfellas is one that never gets old. You can watch that over and over again. But when you think about ranking movies, do you ever take that into account, or do you just say to yourself, this is the movie that was better than this one?
I think for me in that scenario, it would just be on the initial experience that I had with
right
it. There are certain movies that I think were probably like the best of a certain year that I have not gone back to.
Right. I have those too. I absolutely have those as well.
Where I'm just taking into account, like, when you have like that kind of that experience that's hard to describe when you watch something for the first time, and then sometimes like I don't want to damper that by going back to it.
I was going to get to that. Absolutely. Right. I have, I have those movies as well. There are certain movies that I think are perfect, that are great movies. And in a perfect world, I would love to revisit them. But as you say, those movies were impactful on me in a certain way. So I don't want to change that initial experience. Like, just really quickly, the movie that made me become a movie buff was from a joke in City Slickers 2. They made a joke about the Treasure of the Sierra Madre. And I'm the type of person, like you mentioned earlier about the scene from Taxi Driver, and people maybe not have seen the movie. I can't do that. I can't just know that it's an iconic scene. I have to know what the context is.
Yeah.
So I had to know what they were joking about with Treasure of the Sierra Madre. So I went out and watched it, and it really did change my life. I mean, it to me it was. I mean, it's such a classic, and so that kind of opened the floodgates for me. And the other one is The Seventh Seal by Bergman. And the only reason I watched that is because my small library at the college I went to had like 8 movies on DVD. And one of them was The Seventh Seal. I looked at it and I was like, this is a really weird cover. What is this about? I watched it.
I thought you were going to say that your library had Bill and Ted. And so you're like, what are they referencing? Who is this man that wants to play chess?
It was really weird. Like they had that one. They had a couple Fellini movies in there. But they had no mainstream movies really at all. And so I was really in a movie passion mode at that point. So I made it a goal to watch all the movies that they had. And I watched The Seventh Seal, and, I was just mesmerized by it. But I own it. I own both of the movies I just mentioned. I have not rewatched them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think a lot of like Lars von Trier kind of movies too, where like a lot of them will have a real strong visceral reaction the first time you watch it. I mean, some of that's shock value because of the stuff that's in these movies, but not just that. But I mean, that is an experience. That is a part of it that will definitely be duller and lessened if you revisit it.
Right.
So that's a part of it. I also feel that sometimes I don't know, worry is the right term, but like when you mentioned nostalgia, you ever have, I'm sure you've had this experience too, where like it's something that you want to revisit because either you grew up with it or you watched it as, a young child. It was like an important thing for you. And then, as you mentioned, like an experience of like showing it to somebody else or seeing it through their eyes or blah, blah, blah. And then you can't recreate that moment, that effect,
Right.
and in some cases because that was a part of your childhood, so it's like not something that can necessarily be shared because if you didn't catch it then it just doesn't work.
Right.
So, and I actually think, like you mentioned, like Mementos, I would actually imagine that Christopher Nolan's movies would actually fall apart a little bit in revisits in some cases, like not
Depending
like
on how you're examining it, I guess,
I could, yeah, like the Inceptions of the world and Memento. Like, I feel like why would you watch Memento again? Like, it's there are those kind of movies where I feel like that is about something other than the fun of rewatching. I feel like yes, if you go back after knowing the twist of The Sixth Sense, now you can look for the clues. But like,
Right.
okay, like I don't think that's the same thing as necessarily watching it again for your own enjoyment or comfort. That's like now
Right.
that I know the twist, I can now go back and look at where they were hinting at so and so kind of things.
Right.
Which I feel like is a different experience than. But that's the whole nostalgia thing. Like there are certain things that I grew up with that I like, but I don't want to revisit it because I know that like it's not gonna hit the same way. It's gonna be
Right.
really,
I mean,
really
because
bad.
people change,
Absolutely.
your tastes change. And I would say I have that more with shows than I do movies. Like, for instance, I grew up, one of the movies I made my parents rent all the time was Masters of the Universe, which is not high quality cinema. But, I still, it still holds a special place in my heart simply because, it was a part of my childhood. But there are,
Skeletor still doing karaoke?
I think well, they're probably not doing karaoke in general, but
No, well, yeah, well, Skeletor
he,
wore a mask,
he was
so
doing it right up until the point. I want to say,
oh yeah,
I know my wife follows him on social media to some degree. So I think he still does stuff, but
virtual karaoke.
yeah. Skeletor karaoke in Philly if this ever goes back to normal. But anywho, yeah, there are some that effect happens sometimes. Like the movies that just don't resonate with you the same way. On the other side of that coin, there's movies that I've watched since I was a kid that still are good. If you consider like Back to the Future, or certain Rocky movies, but those are movies that have existed since I was little, and they're still comfort food in many respects, even though we've passed the year 2015 from Back to the Future 2.
Yeah.
It's still entertaining to think that could have
And
been.
actually, that series is a pretty good example too, where you experience it. Most people, I imagine, would experience it as a young, not if not child, then preteen maybe. And you're probably. I revisited like the Back to the Future movies in like the past year or so, and
Right.
like 90% of it I never would have gotten at 10 years old. Like
Right.
I don't even know who Reagan is. I don't know who any of these references to him
True.
coming back to his house, and now it's an African American family in the
You
police.
view it on kind of a simplistic level when you're young like that. I feel like you're just like, oh, cool, he went back in time.
It's a cool car.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they fly, and there was an animated show with the dog and blah blah blah. But like the actual things that's saying about the culture and the Reaganism and Americana, the 50s and all that, I wouldn't know that. So that is something where you go back to it, and like maybe if you're in college or you're taking a course on something or whatever with a different kind of lens, then those things definitely benefit from just being somewhat more of an adult.
Right. Well, yeah, taking a class might also be a reason for a repeated viewing.
Yeah. It was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Like I wouldn't know anything about crime, detective noir, or whatever. Like I see an animated bunny.
That was your introduction to film noir, Roger Rabbit.
Probably, it probably was. 5-6 years old. Like I don't think I was watching the Maltese Falcon until at least 7.
That's the next logical step. Clearly, that's
the Naked City until I was 8 years old, probably. Chinatown when I was 9. But yeah, like a lot of those kind of introductions to things where they do hold. Not only do they hold up, but they actually improve if you do want to kind of go back as an adult, because that context is not going to be on. You're not going to even have that context when you're a kid.
And in looking at some of the lists online to prepare for the show, I realized that the more lists you look at, the more it becomes a person's opinion of underrated movies, rather than movies that actually warrant repeated viewings for a certain reason.
Yeah.
You'll see, one, for instance, like one list had, not that I don't like this movie, I do, The Last Samurai on it. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, in what way does that require repeated viewings? Like, I've seen it more than once, me personally, but that's not what would spring to mind unless it's just a movie that you like, right? So when I think of movies that require repeated viewings, it would be separate from what I would consider underrated movies. So, that's why we mentioned movies like The Big Lebowski or 2001, or, there should be a reason why we're pointing to this one as, hey, this one deserves another watch. That, like, there have been times where I've recommended to people if I liked a movie more than them, and they said to me, well, I thought that movie was just okay. I might say to that person, hey, you really should give it another shot. Like, you'll appreciate it more. How often they take my advice, who knows? But I've done that before. I'm sure you've done that. You've probably recommended when people are like, I don't really know if I liked it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there are also certain movies where I'll watch it once and I'll feel kind of I don't know, my emotions are pretty muted. Like I don't outright hate it, but I'm also not as in love with it as many other people seem to be.
Right.
But I'll be thinking about it for a while, like a couple of days after, whatever. And like that will mean something to me and make me want to do the experience again. And
right.
And I don't know if I'm gonna like it more or whatever, but I just don't feel like I'm. It's sticking with me for some reason. I think of that like what we were the debate Midsommar, right? Like, which a movie I don't really like, but I've talked about it with so many people for so long that I need to at least acknowledge on some front that it works as what it is. I don't like it, but I've definitely had more long debates and conversations about it than probably any movie that came out last year in a lot of ways. That on that level, I feel like it works. I have to come to the I must concede that the movie does work.
It's thought provoking
Yeah,
in how it touched you, I guess.
yeah,
Even if you had issues with it.
yeah. And there are other things like you mentioned, like Goodfellas, and those kind of things were like the Scorsese movies. I feel like too are like because they're always edited to like music and like the Stones and like
Right.
there's a real lift. There's like a real high you get on that kind of. Even The Irishman. I mean, there are lulls in The Irishman, and it's a little bit more of a proposition to take on the 3.5 hours of The
Yeah.
Irishman. But there are also like these kind of like really funny individual moments. Like I think that's something like I've watched Casino like once or twice,
Yeah.
but there's certain scenes from the movie I've seen like 20 times.
Yeah.
Which is not, you should never experience a movie the first way that the first time that way. But there are definitely certain moments in
So I
certain.
have to ask, what
Yeah.
scene in Casino have you seen 20 times?
Well, like the cornfield when they kill Pesci and stuff
Okay, see,
like
that's why I asked you, because I would say the same thing about that movie in
it's a
particular.
great. I mean, there are a lot of great scenes, but that one is like there's so many things that are going on in that scene that I would not, the narration that stops mid sentence when he gets killed and all these kind of things that you're
It's
putting.
crazy, that scene.
Yeah,
It really is. Like that one is so graphic and like so shocking.
absolutely. Yeah, and the first time it's the initial wow, I didn't know this was going to happen, expect it.
Right.
Same thing with the way Pesci gets it in Goodfellas.
Right.
Like there are a lot of these, kind of things. And the whole Detroit sequence in The Irishman, which involves Jimmy Hoffa getting killed, uh,
Right.
which is like a 20-minute sequence that I feel like you can just kind of take out of the movie and just watch it as its own short movie.
Probably could. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Where I feel like that's yeah, very is a different kind of thing, but it is just as worthwhile after you've gone through it at least once.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we're wrapping up here, is there a movie you could say you've watched more than any other? I know that might be a hard question. As I'm thinking about it myself, it's a hard question, but it just came to me. So is there a movie you could say, okay, I've probably seen this one more than any other movie?
I would, without having any concrete evidence or facts, but like this is before Letterbox, before I could relog things. Probably like Halloween or Glengarry Glen Ross,
Okay, yeah.
or certain things that just are not as plot heavy. You
Right,
could describe Glengarry Glen Ross Halloween Terror in one sentence, and that's pretty much the plot. But it's not
right.
about, it's not the experience of the plot that's what brings me back. Um, and yeah, and The Shining would be one too, which I feel like is an endless. You can get really into the weeds of symbolism, and some of it is hokey, some of it is actually interesting. Um, where I feel,
Those are all good choices,
yeah,
and
I don't feel like I'll ever be done with them. I guess like they feel like living documents that are always going to
yeah.
exist.
And one way I forgot to mention is how you might, at least how we do it in my house, watch a movie more than once. If it's a movie that you connect with a certain, activity, for example, like when we would go to like a wine tasting, like
Oh,
I would always have to, when we got back, watch Sideways.
yeah.
Always, like that would always be my ritual. We gotta watch Sideways. Like,
Yeah.
I'd be, drunk, but it was still, that's another movie like I'll watch over and over again. But
Yeah.
if you're doing a certain thing, or you just it might just be a rainy Saturday, and you might think to yourself, I want to watch something funny that I've seen before. Let's put on Happy Gilmore or whatever. It doesn't have to be that, but um, but if I'm thinking of a movie that I've watched more than others, it would hard to be pressed to watch one. The Rocky movies would probably be up there for me. Um, I've certainly seen Shawshank a lot of times, and movies like Castaway and Back to the Future, and like certain movies like that. But from when I was young up until now, the Rocky franchise would definitely be at the top of my list.
Yeah.
But
And do you have a particular, do you find that certain genres lend themselves more to repeated viewings, or is that also
action and comedy, I would probably say for sure
mm,
lend themselves to that, because those genres tend to be more of the the comfort or junk food type of movie that people are at ease watching. um Dramas are harder I think, to be, for me personally, like, you have to be in a certain mood to really sit down and watch a drama that you've already seen. Like, for example, this just came to the top of my head. It's a great movie. Like, for instance, Capote. It's a great movie, but it's like, it would be weird if I went downstairs to my wife and said, "Let's rewatch Capote." You know?
Yes, but in cold blood, we're gonna load it. 2005, man. Siriana, Capote, you had all
That's
the.
funny. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah,
You
but
throw on Munich after that. You just sit back and play
Munich
it.
is a great movie.
Yeah.
But like, it would be, if I went downstairs and said that, it would be different if I went downstairs to her and I said, "Hey, let's watch Mean Girls."
Yeah,
Like, it would just be a different reaction, because you expect different things, and you want to feel a certain way
yeah.
when you're watching a movie over and over again, and whereas a movie like Capote,
Yeah. Well, Mean Girls is a good example. I feel like of the kind of movie that became even more popular after it came out.
Yeah. And
Which
that just
does,
happens to be my wife's favorite movie. That's why that one came to my head. But
yeah, but like almost a movie that where if there was I'm creating a fake scenario, but if there's a house party or something and you're I don't know, teenager or older, that you put on like there are certain movies I guess I would like the go to. Like for me, like I remember a lot of people like Donnie Darko was like I've seen Donnie Darko like 4, 5, 6, 7 times.
have you
But
really?
like but like a lot of the times we're in group environments.
Really? I remember
Yeah,
you and I got into a fierce debate about that one back in the day. That was like early on when we met each other.
yeah, that one I mean then they tried doing that with Southland Tales and then I was like nah, that one I can't get you. I can't meet you halfway on that one. But there were like certain movies. I can't think of other examples at the moment, but that were Napoleon Dynamite. There was a time where that was one. Thankfully, that's over. But
Yeah, really.
that was the thing for a bit. Um,
So
yeah,
our ending message is go back to 2005 and watch all those movies.
that was the best year. I mean, look, if I could just redo that entire year,
When you think about revolutionary years in cinema, you think about 1967,
yeah, yeah.
and you think about 2005.
2005. I mean, 2005. It would be funny. Like I will say, just sorry to it's going long, but where it is interesting to watch movies in the context of like you say like 1967, right? And so you mentioned like we think of like Bonnie and Clyde and
The
uh,
Graduate, and
The Graduate and
Cool Hand Luke.
Cool Hand Luke, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? All these
Right.
kind of movies of the time period, which actually improve the more you probably know about the time period as
Sure.
well. And it's
Sure.
not until later in life where I actually did start learning things about the late '60s and
Right.
In the Heat of the Night and what that
Yeah.
was going on in the world at that time. Where that's something where I would go back just because as an adult, I just I'm not going in cold, I guess.
Certain movies you have to put yourself in that time and place, and for for certain people that might be easy to do, and other people it isn't. To them, they might look at a movie. This is an old movie, so it's not something I'm interested in seeing. But like you, to me, it is interesting to research the time period and go back and watch it again. And as you mentioned, in the heat of the night, especially with some of the things that have gone on in the past year or so, like
Yeah.
that would certainly be a good movie to go back and watch again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's hopefully people are inspired to in terms of additional context, if they're interested in the trial of the Chicago Seven, right? The Aaron Sorkin, but like maybe you'll learn more about RFK and the election of '68 and the Democratic National Convention of 1968. Yeah, who knows? I mean, there's something else that we didn't really mention too is that we also like reading reviews and criticism of
Yeah,
things, and that often serves as like the first draft of the movie's history.
sure.
So I like going back to that kind of stuff. That also inspires me to go back to
Yeah,
something.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've read most of Ebert's books, and I always go back and read his reviews, and sometimes if it's a movie that I didn't love as much as he did, I might go back and I might watch that movie again just to say, well, what did he see that I didn't?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be a certain level of movie fanatic, I guess, to want to do something like that. But
Yeah.
but anyway, we thank you for joining us. And if there's any movies out there that you like to watch over and over again, please let us know in the comments. And for Eric, my name is Chad, and we will see you next week.